Okay, everyone stop what you're doing because I need to tell you about the Fable reboot. It's finally here, we got to see actual gameplay footage of it at the Xbox Developer Direct. It's coming in autumn, and I'm so excited I had to drop everything to make this video. You paying attention? Good. This game deserves it. Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today I'm sharing with you my most anticipated game in years, the Fable reboot. I've been keeping my ear to the ground ever since this got announced as an actual thing around 2020, but of course I'd been wanting a new Fable game for basically a decade before that, ever since Fable 3 came out. That one was the worst of the series, and yet I still liked a lot about it. In recent years, I've been disappointed by a lot of new games, especially in existing series that I love, so I have felt quite cautious about new games coming out since I don't want to be disappointed. However, I can say with my whole heart that everything I've seen so far of this new Fable game is right up my alley, and it's pretty much exactly what I wanted from a modern Fable. I am so damn excited about it. Before we get into the video, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course, only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I'm always grateful, even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. For the people who may not be familiar with the Fable series, I'll give you a little explanation of what makes Fable so unique. First and foremost, it's not just a generic fantasy RPG because it's actually set in a more fairy tale-like world where heroes are larger than life and actually have more abilities than regular humans. But the thing that makes this world memorable is that it's chock full of British humor and satire, and a cheekiness with which the world engages and reacts to the player character that no other RPG has. There is essentially a whole social and economical simulation game within the game going on, with you able to form friendships or romantic relationships with NPCs, marry them, and have children. You can also harass NPCs or make fun of them, make them follow you, and sacrifice them in the temple of an evil god. You can buy properties and rent them to make money, evict your tenants just because you feel like it, make money by doing various activities like participating in fight clubs or doing little jobs around town or trading goods between merchants. The NPCs have schedules too. Businesses open and close at certain hours of the day. The people in town walk around when they're free, maybe go to the tavern, go to bed at night, and the whole day-night cycle and schedule thing may not seem like a big thing now, but the first Fable came out in 2004 on Xbox and 2005 on PC, and it blended the RPG gameplay with all of these systems, allowing you to interact quite deeply with the inhabitants of Albion, so it was really impressive for its time. And frankly, even nowadays, there isn't an RPG I can think of that allows this much freedom in your interactions with NPCs. There's also a lot of choice and consequence, not just in the decisions you make in quests, but in how you interact with the world through the morality system and how the world reacts to you. NPCs mentioning your appearance and having opinions on it, talking about feats you've done in their area, using a certain hero title to refer to you. The original trilogy also had your hero's physical appearance change based on a bunch of things, like how good or evil you are, which combat style you use the most, how much food you consume, and so on. So Fable isn't just a regular fantasy RPG, it is the combination of all of these elements that make it something far more impressive than the sum of its parts. I hope that if you didn't know anything about this series, you can understand why us Fable fans are so stoked about a new Fable game, even if it's a reboot. And yes, the devs have confirmed this is a reboot. It doesn't follow any of the timeline of the previous games. They wanted a clean slate, although they do still have a lot of the elements from the world of Albion that was established in the original trilogy, such as the city of Bowerstone, the Heroes Guild, monsters like the Hobbs and Balverines and Trolls, and I'm sure other things as well. And in general, the tone and atmosphere seem to be the same. I actually approve of this being a reboot because I didn't like where they'd taken the world in Fable 3. It got to the Industrial Revolution and it didn't quite feel like the fairy tale fantasy anymore due to the inclusion of guns and way too much modernity. The devs have said their three pillars for this reboot were freedom, fairy tale, and Britishness, so I personally think they hit the nail on the head. That's what Fable is. The story premise of this reboot is that the protagonist grows up in a small village with their grandmother, and through some event that turns the entire village into stone, they discover they're a hero. As I mentioned before, heroes in Albion are stronger than regular humans and are also able to channel will, or magic. The main story is going to have you go on a journey to track down the person responsible for turning your grandmother and the rest of the village into stone. However, you can tackle that main quest at any time you want. You'll be free to explore the open world and do other things first, like say play Landlord Simulator. Seemingly, you should genuinely be able to go anywhere, because combat encounters don't seem to be level gated, at least from what the devs have said. While I do normally prefer for enemies to feel significantly different in terms of power in RPGs, I think that this approach works far better in Fable, because Fable has always been far more about the choice and consequence and the freedom to do what you want to do. But speaking of the open world, from what I've seen so far, this is proving to be a great choice the devs made for this reboot. First of all, loading screens in our day and age are very annoying, especially if you have to sit through a lot of them to travel between many different areas. Most RPGs now are either fully open world or semi-open world with very large regions. And there was nothing special or good about having the world be broken up into pieces in the original Fable series. It was just a technical limitation. I suppose the biggest concern about the reboot having an open world is that there could be a lack of biome variety. They've shown forest and hill areas, the city of Bowerstone, smaller towns or villages, a darker, potentially swampy area, and some large mushrooms. I haven't seen any sandy or snowy places, no large bodies of water to swim or fish in. Obviously, this was just the first proper gameplay we saw, and there's still plenty of time until autumn for them to show off more areas, so I'm pretty optimistic about the visual variety of the world. Another issue I have with open worlds in general is that they tend to be a bit too large compared to the amount of landmarks and actual content to engage with while exploring, so they end up feeling empty, and it can be tedious to travel between areas over and over again for quests if you've already seen everything on the way. Though I'd assume they will have some form of fast travel, like with a Heroes Guild seal, carriages between towns, or perhaps magical waypoints. Whatever the case may be, I feel like Fable is one of those games where fast travel feels perfectly fine, since it has a not-so-serious tone, so it doesn't break immersion if you're able to teleport between places. But we'll have to see just how engaging exploring the world by foot or on horseback will feel like, how large the world actually is, and how full of content. A super important part of Fable is the choice and consequence, and even more so the reactivity of the world in response to your hero's actions. From how the devs talked about this in the gameplay showcase, they seem to understand how crucial this is to get right for a Fable game to feel correct. They've mentioned a quest where a gardener discovers a potion that turns him into a giant, and then it's up to you to resolve that situation, whether you spare him or kill him. If you kill him, his giant corpse will actually remain on the hill near the town for the rest of the game, and that will affect the value of the nearby properties, as well as the opinion that the nearby townsfolk have of you. That's the only big concrete example they gave, and of course I'm not expecting them to spoil a bunch more quests, so I'm choosing to trust that they've included more interesting choices with consequences that feel impactful, like this one. Other than in quests, the way in which Fable makes you feel like what you do and how you're role-playing your hero matters is through the way NPCs react to you. There are apparently over 1,000 NPCs, each with their own name, occupation, and thus also social class, schedule, and every NPC is going to have a particular opinion about your character based on the reputation system that seems to add points towards certain titles or tags for your hero, like rich, tycoon, chicken chaser if you're seen kicking chickens often enough, and these were just the few tags I noticed in the gameplay video, but I'm sure there will be a lot more. This may be one of the more contentious features of the reboot that some people may not agree with, because it's replacing Fable's previous good versus evil morality system. I personally think a regional reputation system where NPCs react to you based on what they're actually likely to have seen or heard of you makes more sense, first and foremost, and secondly, it also opens up a lot more opportunities for interesting interactions with various characters. While the idea of your character going more down the path of good or evil towards the extremes, where you ended up looking like an angel or demon, complete with halo or horns respectively, was cool, it was more silly than anything. And yes, people reacted to your appearance, but what the devs said about this is true too. You kind of end up being locked into most everyone seeing your character in a single way, and that's not as fun as being able to build up your reputation with certain settlements or groups separately from each other. There's also the potential to play around with class dynamics too, which is a significant element of the Britishness and satire pillar of the Fable series. So if you act like a rich twat, as one of the commoner NPCs in the game seems to see you as, due to you buying up all the homes and shops, the lower classes will not really like you much, especially if you ask them for ridiculously high rent for the privilege of living in one of your properties. On the other hand, the upper class NPCs might like you more, or at least behave as if they do, because they think it's worth being in the good graces of someone as rich and powerful as your hero. I think players are too obsessed with a very clearly defined good versus evil morality system, but it really isn't as clear-cut as that, and you can't tell very interesting stories if you constrain yourself to such a rigid concept of morality. So personally, I'm very happy with the reputation system replacing that. It remains to be seen how well this is implemented and just how reactive it feels, but I think it looks very promising, especially combined with how much they focused on fleshing out your interactions with the NPCs. Speaking of, let's talk about the social and immersive gameplay. What the devs have said they're doing with the 1,000+ NPCs who each have their own name, occupation, schedule, and opinion of you is of course very nice, but a lot of how good Fable feels hinges on this system. So I really hope they got this right, because if they didn't, it's going to be a huge disappointment. It's all good that you're able to flirt with NPCs, go on dates with them, and marry them and have kids together, or even divorce, but all of your interactions with the NPCs, even them just calling you names as you pass them by, add a lot of immersion, so there has to be enough variety to these interactions and reactions for it to truly feel like your hero exists in that world and is actually changing things around them, and changing how people see them through their actions. There's also the other little systems that add to the feeling of immersion and to the fableness of the game, such as doing various jobs for money with minigames. We saw a blacksmithing minigame as part of this, which looked great, and I also hope we have something like the bard singing and pie making minigames from Fable 3. You can also buy properties and businesses for passive income to get super mega rich. One thing I didn't see that I'd have liked to in terms of little games within the game is fishing. And I don't much remember seeing any large body of water, in fact, but I do hope it's there. I always like having fishing in my RPGs. I'm hoping we also have the option to change our hero's appearance during the game by going to a barbershop or getting new tattoos. We already saw a few different outfits, so that I'm quite satisfied with, although I admit I'm very curious to know how gear is going to work in Fable. How many weapon slots are we going to have for our melee and ranged weapons? Is armor and clothing only cosmetic, or does it also grant us some kind of bonus stats? And how will the magic system work? How many equipped spells? What kinds of magic do we have access to? This sets me up perfectly for the next section I wanted to talk about, which is combat. Combat in Fable has always been about being able to seamlessly change between melee, ranged, and magic, and I'm very happy to see this continues to be the case in the reboot. Of course, just because you can switch doesn't mean you have to. I'm sure that just like in the previous games, you should be able to get through the game without issues, even if you focus only on one thing out of melee, ranged, and magic. There might be a few tutorials and quests where you will be forced to use a particular type of attack or spell, but I'm expecting that if you want to specialize in one combat playstyle, you absolutely can. What I've seen of the combat so far looks really good, maybe even a bit too good, to be honest. Fable has never had particularly amazing combat in the original trilogy. Fun? Sure, for the most part, but also a bit clunky and not particularly unique. To be fair, the series was very ambitious in the other aspects, particularly with choice, consequence, reactivity, social, and immersive gameplay. Those features are quite hard to develop and get right. I'm fairly certain those are the main reason why the Fable reboot has been in development for so long. So I'm absolutely giving the original trilogy a lot of slack when it comes to combat. In comparison, the combat of the reboot looks really fluid, responsive, with great feedback when you hit enemies. I've heard people compare it to the combat from The Witcher 3, and frankly, I wouldn't really know since I don't like that game and haven't played it. I think the weaving between melee, ranged, and magic combat that I've seen in the gameplay showcase for Fable looks a lot better than The Witcher. Does it look like pretty generic fantasy action RPG combat? Yes, but that's what the combat in Fable has always been like. At least this time around, it looks a lot more satisfying. If you're expecting some kind of super complex combat system, go play Kingdom Come Deliverance or a Souls-like. Fable isn't meant to be a difficult game. It's meant to be fun and funny. So all I need from the combat is for it to be easy to pick up and for it to feel extremely satisfying to destroy all of the monsters in my way with whatever combination of weapons and magic I want to use. The melee combat looks right up my alley, especially the two-handed maul that I spied in one of the clips they showed. I love heavy barbarian-like combat, so you bet that's going to be my first playthrough, together with a bit of magic thrown in for good measure. The light melee combat is a bit too dexterous and focused on doing stuff like dodging and parrying for my liking, so I'm leaving that for the people who have good reflexes. But it does look fun, even if I'd be terrible at it. I've never been a huge fan of ranged gameplay, and so even though it looks perfectly fine in Fable, I probably won't use it much other than in one ranged playthrough that I'll do eventually just out of curiosity. One thing I noticed in the showcase is that you seem to be able to target certain parts of an enemy's body when you aim, and if you target a weak or unarmored spot, you will be able to stagger them or knock them down, which I think is very cool. This is nice on its own for a fully ranged build, but it could also help you temporarily disable an enemy before you switch to your melee weapon to smash into them while they're recovering. When it comes to magic, we've mostly seen offensive spells, other than the one that turns an enemy into a chicken temporarily, which was very fun. I love that spell, and I will use it all the time because I don't know if you noticed, but after the enemy turned back into his original form, he was still moving for a bit like a chicken and clucking. I'm hoping we'll see a bunch more interesting non-offensive spells like this, whether it's something that shields you, buffs your melee or ranged attacks, summons a creature to fight for you, or maybe slows down or stops enemies in place. In any case, for me the combat looks not only serviceable but actually fun, and since the combat wasn't the main draw of Fable for me, I would have been fine with something far worse than this. I think there should be enough variety here between the different weapons and magic to satisfy a lot of players, especially since you can find a combination that suits you, but I am very curious to know what you think of the combat we've seen so far, especially if you're someone who is a more combat-focused player than me. Do you think it looks fun? Moving on, I'd like to highlight what the main similarities and differences between the original trilogy and the reboot are. I've already mentioned them throughout this video, but I'll talk a bit more in depth about them here so that I can share my own thoughts about the direction the reboot is going in, as a huge fan of the original Fable. In terms of similarities, I do think they got a lot of things right with the tone, the British humor, the strong focus on NPC interactivity and interactions, and even the combat system, modernized as it may be. So everything that has stayed similar to the original games is a huge plus. There's a few ways in which the reboot diverges that I consider to be positive. For one, the open world. No more loading screens sounds amazing, and I've always wanted to be able to explore Albion more fully, not just in little bits and pieces. I do have concerns about just how fun the world will be to explore based on how full of content it is, but that's a matter of execution, not the mere fact of it being an open world. After all, Skyrim has one of the best open worlds out there because the designers knew how to space out landmarks and encounters perfectly. And I say this as someone who doesn't even like Skyrim. Another positive divergence for me is the reputation system, at least on paper. I wasn't really beholden to the whole angelic/demonic appearance change based on you being good or evil, especially since a lot of the time I did end up choosing a combination of both good and evil choices, which didn't push my character super far towards one end of the spectrum. There are opportunities to do a lot of interesting things with its new regional reputation system, so I'm curious to see how it's implemented and whether they managed to pull off what they were going for. I am a little miffed about one particular divergence when it comes to your character's appearance not morphing anymore. In the original games, if you primarily used melee weapons, your character would get a bunch of scars, and if you increased your strength, you would actually look more muscular. You'd be leaner if you mainly used bows, and if you cast a lot of spells, you'd get glowy eyes and veins and a magical aura. It was very cool, and it felt like a direct consequence of how you chose to fight and what stats you chose to improve. From what I understood, the devs have removed any kind of body morphing completely, so your hero's body will remain the same as it was when you created it. Though I am a bit confused about this, since you will start the game as a child, as is tradition in Fable, at least in terms of the first two games, we're ignoring the third one. So we have to create both the child and adult versions of the protagonist, since we do actually get to customize our hero this time around. Frankly, I would have preferred just choosing between two bodies for the hero, only getting to customize the skin color maybe, and leaving the customization and morphing to happen during the game through your actions and visiting barbershops and tattoo artists. But it's not really a deal breaker for me, I just would have liked to see some body morphing based on how you fight. The other big departure compared to the original series is that suddenly the game looks a lot more realistic, especially when it comes to the character models. I think the environment looks fine, especially the city and towns. The nature looks okay so far, nothing special, but your character and the NPCs are a bit too human. With the humorous tone that Fable has, a more cartoonish or stylized design for people would have fit better. I do understand that Playground Games have a lot of experience with this realistic style from their Forza Horizon games, and again I think in terms of environments that's all good, but I was a big fan of the weird and quite ugly faces that characters in the original trilogy had. It was part of the game's charm. The characters in the reboot just look too clean and pretty. This one is also a pretty minor negative for me, because while I prefer the visuals of the game to be more integrated with the tone and themes, as long as it isn't super jarring or poorly designed, I'm fine with it being just too generic. Better generic than a travesty like the character and clothing designs from something like Concord or Veilguard. In any case, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about what I think in regards to the reboot's similarities and differences to the original Fable. Finally, I'd like to address just a couple of things that we just don't know yet, and which I would very much like to know before the game comes out. First and foremost, we haven't been shown much of how exactly our hero will be interacting with NPCs, both during quests and outside of them. The reason I'm interested in this is because the previous Fable games had very limited interactions that you could choose from. Some actions that the NPCs would like or dislike, giving them gifts to befriend or romance them, and during quests you just made choices without really speaking. I saw that the hero had a greeting line to a shopkeeper in the showcase, so it seems that her character will be at least a little talkative. I just hope not too talkative. I don't want to see actual dialogue options in quests, because I think that in a game like Fable that takes away from the freedom to imagine your hero choosing to do something for their own reasons. Having pre-written dialogue lines would make role-playing more limited and less fun, at least for me. Let me make my choice and decide for myself in my own mind why my character is doing something. This isn't one of those games where you are super well integrated into the world through your companions like Dragon Age or Mass Effect or Baldur's Gate. It's also not one of those games where you have a clearly defined protagonist who has to express their personality through dialogue like The Witcher. So keep my hero's speech to a minimum and let me imagine it. I also think that the unique tone that Fable has makes the storytelling much easier to tell through the NPCs in the world and through how your actions affect them. They get to have their own unique and wacky personalities and react in all sorts of fun ways to what's happening. It's much harder to give enough dialogue options to the player character to allow the player to roleplay enough, especially when you also have to make things funny and also keep the options few in number so that they can have strong consequences. The other thing I didn't see at all in the showcase, and which was also not mentioned in articles as far as I've seen, have been the demon doors. What's up with that? I think the demon doors are one of the most iconic creatures/vaults from Fable, and they're so easy to make as well. It's just a stone door with a face on it that snarks at you or gives you some kind of riddle or puzzle to solve, and once you do, it opens up to reveal a chamber with treasure. I absolutely adore the demon doors, so I hope that they just didn't think to show them in this particular video, but they will sometime soon. Because I can excuse the fact that we don't have body morphing and a bunch of other things from the original trilogy, but I draw the line at demon doors. I will actually be upset and disappointed if we don't have demon doors. In conclusion, I'm extremely excited for the Fable reboot and genuinely mostly positive about what I've seen. It's hard not to be a bit cautious these days with new entries into beloved franchises, because so many of them have been ruined by corporations trying to be too safe and appeal to a too wide audience. I personally think Fable has huge potential to have very wide appeal just because it has so many gameplay features. And while a small portion of people may be put off it due to the British humor, I absolutely think it'll be a plus for most. If I were to put a number on it, I'd say what I've seen of this reboot is about 90% of what I wanted to see from a new Fable game. The demon doors are missing, I'm a bit disappointed that our hero won't change in appearance based on how they fight, and I'm concerned about role-playing being limited if they end up adding proper voiced dialogue options in quests. But on the whole, I'm loving the new Fable, and even with these few negatives, I know I'd still enjoy playing it a lot. How do you feel about it? Are you as excited as I am, or does Fable just not appeal to you that much? Let me know down below. I hope you found this look at the new Fable game coming this autumn interesting. I worked very hard on wrangling my too excited initial rambles into something coherent that touched upon all the things I wanted to discuss about this reboot. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future discussion videos, guides, and reviews I plan to make about games I care about. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Fable and will update you if we get some more interesting details from future dev showcases before release. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.